everyone, my name is Evan and I like to make stop-motion dinosaurs and monsters, and now that our dragon restoration is done, it's time for some more movie monster fun. So Project Shin Godzilla has now begun. First thing we need to make for Shin, I say, is the base frame today, and as I craft away at Shin Godzilla's skeleton today, we'll be learning more about this Japanese movie monster's terrifying origins, I do say. So be sure to smash that like button as hard as a kaiju, as I like to say. Subscribe if you're new here today so you don't miss a video, I do say. Share with your monster-loving friends and comment below what you think at the end. So, my fellow nerds and Godzilla fans alike, the topic of the day is Shin Godzilla, you could say. Otherwise known as Shin Godzilla for those that don't speak Japanese. Quick fun fact to know and share, the word Gojira is a combination of Japanese words, both gorilla and whale. Anyways, I have an explanation video for you, and this one's detailing the character of Shin Godzilla. And it's been a while since I've done a movie monster specifically, so it's good to be back. Shin Godzilla, otherwise known as the God of Destruction, is one of the most interesting takes on this movie monster thus far, as he's one of the few we see that go through multiple evolutionary stages. The only other ones that immediately come to mind is Manila and potentially Godzilla -1. However, that being said, even their growth wasn't exactly that drastic. More on Godzilla -1 later on. The origins of Shin Godzilla are never explicitly stated in the film, but it's proposed that his origins lie as being some sort of Pacific Sea creature that was exposed to and thusly mutated by nuclear waste. Since the 1950s, not only did it develop an immunity to this radioactive wasteland, it started feeding on it as some sort of subsistence, and over the course of 60 years, grew and changed till it was able to have a form that could withstand being on land, then eventually evolving over time into something that can stand upright. The zoology professor in the film, Gore Maki, hypothesized that Godzilla's origins lie as a prehistoric marine reptile from the Paleozoic era. In his first form, he exists as seemingly a large, angry reddish tail shooting out of the water, and whiplashing to and fro as the rest of his body's actually laying underneath the surface. The second form, nicknamed Kamata-kun, is 122 meters long and 28 meters tall, and takes on the appearance of an eel shark with legs, for lack of a better description. It has giant fish eyes and tan dorsal plates. To be honest, it's only a face a mother could love. Potentially. And it should be mentioned that it has to lean forward rather awkwardly, as it runs about with its nearly vestigial arms. However, as time passes, it fixes its posture some, and begins to stand up into its third form, nicknamed Shinagawa-kun. The yellow-green color turns into a darkish reddish-brown. The little arms grow just a teeny bit more as the giant eyes fit more into the face. And it should be noted he still looks a little awkward in this stage in his life. To be honest, a bit ugly. Shinagawa-kun stands at 57 meters tall and 168.25 meters long, before becoming the fourth form which we are most familiar with. The fourth form is known as Katakuma-san, and is the form that takes the most resemblance from past Godzillas, however is still very unique in its own right. It has rough black skin and black dorsal plates with red hues all along its body. This was a Godzilla that was meant to be feared. Standing in at 118.5 meters tall, 333 meters long, and weighs in at 92,000 metric tons. It is understandable how he was essentially untouchable for such a large portion of the film, which isn't even including his special capabilities or powers. Speaking of which, let's get into those. The abilities of Katakuma-san include the trademark atomic breath, but this time it takes on more of a purple glowish hue, and more focused laser-like look in its appearance. But not only does it cut down objects, it sets them ablaze like a plasma beam. And that's not all either, because Shin Godzilla can redirect those beams out his dorsal plates and tail as well. So whatever direction you stand in, you're bound to get hit. He is also extremely durable, as the only military weapon that did damage to him was the massive Orbitant Penetrator, or Mop Bomb, that struck off one of his dorsal plates and actually made him bleed. It should also be briefly mentioned during his evolutionary stages, Shin was basically bleeding all over the place, but at this point, he wasn't really bleeding anymore, apart from the damage that was actually delivered to him at this point, which we'll probably talk about in a future video. Either way, he did heal that wound over fairly quickly with his regeneration powers. This true god of destruction also comes equipped with a phase array radar, which essentially means he is able to detect threats without actually needing to see them. So there's no safe approach from any direction from those big plasma beams, not to mention you can't sneak up on this character. So at this point, you might be asking, what can bring this behemoth down? Well, there is a limit to how much atomic energy that this Godzilla can use. And after he's done expending all this excess nuclear energy, he has to go through a 15-day restoration period. And this was of course exploited in the movie, forcing a reactor scram inside his body, and during this process, essentially freezing him solid. Also, he has very tiny arms that have the resemblance of burnt chicken wings. Now, you might be thinking, that's all. However, there's still more secret forms. Although the fourth form is what's given the most attention in the film, the fifth form was very close to making a nightmare's debut, and may have actually been truly unstoppable. At the end of the movie, you can see small humanoid skeleton creatures with dorsal plates traveling and forming at the end of Godzilla's tail. These horrific fanged beasts with 2 eye holes, with long fingers and pale skin, was not only potentially capable of doing what the last form could do, but potentially even more. Luckily though, we don't see the final result of that in the film, which in retrospect is probably a good thing because there's only one outcome in that scenario. Basically burning down all of Japan and potentially taking over the entire world. Now, with that being said, what are your thoughts on the uncanny value of the existence of Shin Godzilla? Let me know in the comments below. Now that leads us into a theory, a film theory, a Shin Godzilla -1 theory. Now, a quick summary on Godzilla -1, essentially he's supposed to be the original one, where he shows 2 different evolutionary stages in the movie. One where he's more of an original dinosaur type monster, and then gets, well, morphed into Godzilla from the nuclear bombing and testing that was basically occurring. Here you can see a pattern developing already. Both Godzillas obviously use atomic energy to basically form into something else, with it either being atomic bombing and or consuming nuclear waste. I'm assuming consuming nuclear waste is not a very healthy option. With that being said, I assume actually neither option is very viable, considering this is probably why Godzilla is so angry. Now, one other common trait that Shin Godzilla shares with Godzilla -1 is that they both have regeneration powers, which means they're able to heal themselves almost instantly. So in my opinion, those are 2 very common traits that kind of stick out like sore thumbs. Which leads me into this theory, this film theory. Now, spoiler alert, at the end of Godzilla -1, yes, it is true they defeat the monster. However, there is a clip at the very ending suggesting that this monster isn't truly defeated just yet. Because just before the film ends, you can see one of the larger chunks of Godzilla that is still remaining happens to be, well, forming and morphing into something else. And considering the time frame in which Godzilla -1 is being taken place, which is 1945, that seems to oddly line up with another time frame. If you consider the earlier fact about Shin Godzilla essentially feeding off nuclear waste since the 1950s. So I have a sneaking suspicion or a theory that Godzilla -1 is essentially the first evolutionary stage of Shin Godzilla, just occurring 60 years later to seek vengeance on the human race, buying its time by regenerating and consuming nuclear waste to essentially help speed up that process. Which also happens to be very similar to what legendary Godzilla does as well when he seems to be running low on power. You can usually give him a bit of a boost, but that being said, I would imagine consuming nuclear waste is probably far more toxic and less healthy, giving you, well, less desirable side effects. Explaining why Shin Godzilla might not be the most healthiest of specimens at the beginning. So, to briefly sum my theory up, essentially I think that Godzilla -1 is technically Shin Godzilla, and was basically formed out of that remaining blob you see at the end of the Godzilla -1 movie. Now, I do understand that this does slightly contradict the zoologist theory in Shin Godzilla, but this could be a classic case of just misinformation, not exactly perhaps tying 2 together. or perhaps certain files were buried during the first incident, therefore being unaware of what this potentially is. Because one should bear in mind that this is nearly 60 years later. So that's my film theory on Godzilla Minus One and Shin Godzilla. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Am I crazy or am I not? It seems to be that these two characters share an awful lot of things in common. I mean, that could be added up to the fact that they're both Godzillas technically. However, it seems a little suspicious in my end, especially that ending at Godzilla Minus One. I guess we won't truly know if I'm right or not up until the sequel. At any rate, it's time for the build rundown. So the materials used on this Godzilla project today was a lot of Sculpey oven-baked clay, brackets not sponsored. But a lot of that went into basically making those spikes, and I can't emphasize enough how much work went into those. It was at least probably 2-3 days of spike work, but that's pretty normal for a lot of my Godzillas. Now, for part 2, I do have a special painting technique that I'm going to try out with these spikes because I went a little bit more detail than usual. I also used a lot of tinfoil today to basically help save us on the weight because you don't want your Godzillas to fall over, so that's highly recommended to use tinfoil as a filler to help save weight and clay. Then we also used some armature wire for basically the joints and the tail, as well as some plasticine clay to help make the joints stay, which we're currently having a little bit of trouble with trying to show off this tail that was made off camera. So this tail tip is easily probably one of the more difficult / creepy things that I've ever made. Unfortunately, there is no footage of me making it because it was really difficult and I just didn't have a whole lot of time span left on this video for criming in theories and everything else. So that was one thing I kind of had to make off camera, unfortunately. But as you can see, it's essentially 2 human jaws, the outside one being very deformed and the inside one looking a little bit more familiar and actually functional. So I'm looking forward to doing some tail animations with this character. And I guess you can consider that this tail is just a little bit of a bonus for you people that stick towards the end of the videos. Now, probably one of the cooler things I was able to pull off on this skeleton, Shin Godzilla's lower split jaw. I'm happy to say I was actually able to pull that off. So one could say more surprises are coming your way, so stay tuned for part 2 and 3 soon coming your way. Hey, thanks for sticking around to the very end of the video. Be sure to leave a like if you enjoyed the content, comment below what you think, share with your friends, and perhaps consider subscribing if anything. Anyway, that's enough from me. Till next time, take it easy.